My name is Lauren Carter, and for years, I convinced myself I was living the kind of life people envied. A comfortable home in the suburbs, 2 beautiful kids, and a husband who, on the surface, checked every box of what a good man should be. To our neighbors and friends, we were that couple, the ones who hosted barbecues in the summer, showed up at school fundraisers together, smiled for Christmas photos with matching sweaters. I let the world believe I had it all, and maybe, for a while, I believed it too. Daniel, my husband, was charming in all the right ways. He could make a room laugh with just one story, he remembered anniversaries, and he always seemed dependable. He worked long hours at his firm, but he reassured me it was for us, for the mortgage, the vacations, the private school we wanted for the kids. I stayed home more, balancing part-time work with raising Emma and Noah, and I told myself we were a team. But in hindsight, the cracks were there long before I ever admitted them. While you enjoy this story, make sure to hit subscribe for more shocking tales of betrayal. At first, it was small things, moments I brushed aside because I didn't want to believe what they meant. Daniel started staying late at the office more often. Deadlines, he'd say with a quick kiss on the cheek, already halfway out the door. His phone, once left casually on the counter, became glued to his hand. If I asked who he was texting, he'd laugh and call me paranoid. I told myself not to nag, not to push. Every marriage had its phases, right? And besides, he still showed up at family dinners, still brought me flowers on birthdays, still tucked the kids into bed when he could. I clung to those small gestures like lifelines, convincing myself they proved nothing had really changed. But deep down, I felt it. A shift. A distance that no bouquet of roses could cover. The turning point came on our 12th wedding anniversary. I had gone all out, arranged for my mom to watch the kids, made a reservation at his favorite steakhouse, even bought a dress I couldn't really afford just to remind him of the woman he married. I spent the afternoon curling my hair, putting on makeup, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. I wanted that night to be proof that we were still us. But Daniel never showed. I sat at that restaurant for over an hour, pushing food around my plate, staring at the door every time it opened. My phone buzzed once with a short text, "Can't make it. Work emergency." No apology, no explanation. Just that. I drove home in silence, my chest tight, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. When I pulled into the driveway, his car was already there. He was in the living room, tie loosened, scrolling on his phone like it was any other night. That's when I noticed it, the faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine, clinging to his shirt. The lipstick smudge just barely visible on his collar. He saw me looking and adjusted his jacket quickly, like he thought I wouldn't notice. And then he smiled, as if nothing had happened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, to throw the evidence in his face. But something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, maybe it was fear, maybe it was the sudden realization that if I confronted him without proof, he'd twist it until I was the one who looked crazy. So instead, I nodded, forced a smile, and said I was tired. I went upstairs, changed into pajamas, and crawled into bed beside him later that night, pretending to sleep while my mind spun in circles. That was the night I understood that the man lying next to me, the man who had vowed to be my partner, my protector, my safe place, wasn't who I thought he was. But here's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't just happen in one moment. It builds, quietly, brick by brick, until suddenly the wall of trust you thought you had is nothing but rubble. That night was just the first stone falling. I didn't know it then, but my life was about to unravel in ways I couldn't imagine. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't just break my marriage. It would burn everything Daniel thought he had built to the ground. After our anniversary, I couldn't look at Daniel the same way. Every late night, every vague text, every unexplained charge on our credit card gnawed at me. I had spent 12 years trusting this man, building a life around the idea that he was my partner. But now, every smile felt fake, every excuse sounded rehearsed. I told myself not to become paranoid, not to spiral into accusations, but the seed was already planted. It grew with every unanswered call, every Saturday morning meeting, every dinner where he stared at his phone instead of at me. And then one afternoon, I stumbled on the first undeniable proof. Daniel had left his laptop on the kitchen counter, logged in. Normally, I wouldn't touch it. I believed in boundaries, in trust, but that night in the restaurant still haunted me. My hands shook as I opened the lid. The screen was glowing with an email inbox. At first, it looked harmless. Work memos. Calendar invites. But then I saw it, a folder buried beneath layers of subfolders, labeled personal. Curiosity outweighed fear. I clicked. Inside were emails that made my stomach drop. Reservations for hotel rooms downtown. Credit card confirmations for expensive dinners. Messages filled with words a husband should only write to his wife, but these weren't written to me. The nicknames, the confessions, the promises, they were all for someone else. And it wasn't just one person. There were several names, several chains of messages. Different women. Different lies. I closed the laptop so quickly it nearly snapped shut. My chest ached, my pulse thundering in my ears. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw the computer across the room. But instead, I sat there in silence, my hands covering my mouth as tears burned down my cheeks. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, wasn't just having an affair. He was living an entirely different life right under my nose. I could have confronted him that night, but I didn't. Something inside me said to wait. Daniel was slippery. He had a way of twisting things, of making me doubt myself. If I didn't have undeniable evidence, he'd gaslight me until I was the one apologizing. So I decided to play a different game. I started small. Checking bank statements when he wasn't around. Quietly reviewing phone records. Each time, I found something new, a dinner bill at a restaurant I'd never been to, a charge for jewelry I'd never received, calls made at odd hours. The picture became clearer. Daniel wasn't just betraying me emotionally, he was draining our finances to fuel his double life. Money that should have gone to Emma's braces or Noah's college fund was being spent on hotel suites and champagne dinners. The betrayal deepened into something darker. He wasn't just breaking my heart, he was gambling with our children's future. I knew I couldn't face this alone. So one morning, while Daniel was at work, I scheduled a consultation with a divorce lawyer. Walking into that office felt surreal, like I was stepping into a life I hadn't imagined for myself. I explained everything I'd found, careful not to let my voice crack, even though my insides were unraveling. The lawyer listened, nodding slowly. She didn't look surprised. Maybe she'd seen too many women like me, blindsided by men who thought they were untouchable. Her advice was sharp, practical, and terrifying. Don't confront him yet. Keep collecting. Protect yourself. Protect your kids. I left her office with a notebook full of instructions. Open a separate bank account. Secure important documents. Gather proof quietly. Patience, she said, would be my greatest weapon. So I became someone else, a woman with a mask. At home, I acted like nothing had changed. I kissed him goodnight, packed his lunches, even asked about his long days, with a smile. Inside, though, I was cataloging every lie, every slip, every transaction. I began keeping a folder hidden deep in my desk. Screenshots, bank statements, copies of emails, notes on his absences. Each page was another piece of the puzzle, another weapon I would eventually use. And Daniel? He had no idea. In fact, he seemed more confident than ever. He laughed louder, scrolled longer, stayed out later. He believed he was invincible. But he didn't know I was watching. He didn't know I was waiting. And most of all, he didn't know that the life he thought he controlled was already beginning to crumble, piece by piece, in the silence of my planning. After meeting with the lawyer, my life split in two. On the outside, I was still the dutiful wife, smiling at neighborhood gatherings, packing lunches, laughing politely at Daniel's bad jokes. But behind closed doors, I was methodical, deliberate, calculating. Every lie he told was another thread I wove into a net, one I was tightening around him day by day. Patience was never my strong suit, but in this situation, it became my greatest weapon. Every morning, I reminded myself not to break character. I had to look like the same woman Daniel thought he could fool, the same wife who would never dare question him. If I showed even a hint of suspicion, he'd change his patterns. He might even get rid of the evidence I hadn't found yet. So I wore the mask. At night, when he came home late with excuses about last-minute deadlines, I nodded and offered him dinner. When his phone buzzed at midnight, I rolled over and pretended to sleep. When he bragged about closing a big deal at work, I smiled even though I knew he'd spent the afternoon in a hotel room. Inside, I was boiling. But on the surface, I was ice. Meanwhile, I worked quietly to protect myself and the kids. I opened a bank account in my own name and began redirecting my freelance income. I called the bank and locked Emma's college savings with a code only I knew. I made copies of every important document, birth certificates, the mortgage, insurance policies, and stored them in a safe deposit box Daniel didn't know existed. Piece by piece, I was reclaiming control. The private investigator my lawyer recommended became my silent ally. Each week, he delivered new reports, photographs of Daniel at restaurants, records of hotel stays, timestamps that aligned perfectly with his late nights at the office. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was undeniable proof. Every snapshot was another crack in the illusion Daniel thought he had perfected. But the most painful part wasn't the women. It was the money. Buried in the reports and statements was evidence that Daniel had been draining our accounts to fund a failing business venture I knew nothing about. He had borrowed against our house, dipped into savings, even pulled from Emma's braces fund. While I was budgeting for groceries and school fees, he was throwing away our security like it was monopoly money. I remember staring at one bank statement late at night, my hands trembling as I added up the withdrawals. Thousands of dollars gone, money I had counted on for our children's future. That was when the anger hardened into resolve. He wasn't just betraying me. He was endangering our kids. From that moment on, this stopped being about heartbreak. It became about survival. I built a timeline, organized files, labeled everything. My folder grew thicker by the day. I even kept a digital copy on an encrypted drive, just in case. If Daniel ever tried to destroy the evidence, he'd fail. I had backups for my backups. And through it all, he kept digging his own grave. One Friday night, he came home later than usual, tie undone, smelling of whiskey and perfume. He kissed my cheek, muttered something about networking, and stumbled upstairs. I watched him go, silent, my face neutral. He thought I hadn't noticed the lipstick smeared on his collar, the hotel keycard slipping out of his pocket. But I noticed everything. He was too arrogant to realize he was unraveling. The irony was almost poetic. While he believed he was pulling strings, I was the one tightening the knots. Every late night, every reckless dollar, every careless mistake was another nail in the coffin of his carefully crafted double life. I told myself to wait, to hold steady. The confrontation would come, but it had to come on my terms. If I rushed it, I'd risk losing everything I'd built. So I smiled a little brighter, played the part a little better, and let him think he was still winning. What Daniel didn't know was that his empire of lies was already collapsing. And when it finally crumbled, it wouldn't be an accident. It would be because I pushed it over. By the time autumn came, my mask was second nature. I could smile at Daniel across the dinner table while my mind replayed every receipt, every photograph, every lie he thought I hadn't seen. The folder I had built over months had grown heavy, both in weight and in consequence. It wasn't just a collection of papers anymore, it was a weapon. And I was ready to use it. The trigger came on a night I will never forget. Emma had been practicing for weeks for her school recital, and she begged Daniel to come. He promised he wouldn't miss it. Swore on everything that mattered. She saved him a front row seat with a little sign she had made herself. But when the curtains rose, the chair stayed empty. I watched Emma's face falter as she scanned the crowd, looking for him. She played her piece beautifully, but her smile was gone. And in that moment, my patience evaporated. It was no longer about me, it was about the little girl on that stage whose hero had just broken her heart. That night, after I tucked Emma and Noah into bed, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I walked straight to my office, opened the drawer, and pulled out the binder I'd been building for months. Messages. Photos. Bank records. Investigator reports. Legal documents my lawyer had prepared. My arsenal was complete. The next morning, I waited until Daniel had settled into his home office. He was sipping coffee, scrolling through his phone, humming like his world was perfectly intact. Without a word, I walked in and dropped the binder onto his desk. Papers spilled across the polished wood, damning evidence staring back at him in black and white. For the first time, I saw his confidence crack. His face drained of color. He fumbled to gather the pages, his eyes darting from hotel confirmations to wire transfers to photographs of him with women who weren't me. "What is this?" he muttered, his voice low, strained. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence said everything. He stammered, tried to explain, tried to spin it into business dinners and networking events. He even attempted the classic gaslight, suggesting I had misunderstood, that I was overreacting. But the more he spoke, the more pathetic he looked. Finally, he dropped the pretense and begged. He swore it was a phase, that he'd fix it, that he still loved me. His words were frantic, desperate, tumbling over each other. But they meant nothing. I had already filed. "I know what you've done," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. For months, I had practiced this moment in my mind, and now it was here. And so will the court. The look in his eyes was something I'll never forget, fear. For the first time in our marriage, Daniel realized he wasn't the one in control. The weeks that followed were brutal, a blur of lawyers and paperwork and depositions. Daniel fought at first, throwing every excuse and manipulation he could find. He tried to delay hearings, to hide assets, to paint me as bitter. But every time, I had proof. Every lie he told crumbled under the weight of my evidence. Piece by piece, I dismantled the empire he had built on deceit. The judge saw it all, the affairs, the financial recklessness, the selfish disregard for our family. His credibility eroded with each passing day. At home, Daniel's confidence vanished. He grew quieter, more irritable, snapping at the kids when he thought I wasn't listening. The man who once strutted through life like he owned it now looked like a shell, cornered and desperate. And yet, he still underestimated me. He thought maybe, just maybe, I'd back down. That after years of marriage, I'd still soften. But he didn't realize that something inside me had changed. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was resolved. This wasn't about saving him or even punishing him. It was about saving myself, and my children, from the wreckage he had created. And when the final hearing approached, I knew one thing for certain: Daniel's downfall was inevitable. Because I wasn't just ending a marriage. I was burning down the lie he had built, and I was walking away from the ashes stronger than ever. Walking into the courtroom on the morning of the final hearing felt surreal. For months, I had lived in a constant state of tension, masking my emotions, collecting evidence, bracing for the next lie Daniel would spin. Now, all of it was coming to an end. The folder I carried was heavy in my arms, but not as heavy as the years of betrayal it represented. Daniel sat across the room, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His suit was wrinkled, his face drawn. He avoided my eyes. This was the same man who once stood at an altar and vowed to protect me, the same man who strutted around our house with the arrogance of someone who thought he could never be caught. Now, he looked like a child who'd been sent to the principal's office. The proceedings began, and for the first time, the truth was laid out plainly. The judge saw everything: financial statements showing withdrawals he couldn't explain, photos of him with women at hotels, investigator reports documenting his double life. Each exhibit chipped away at whatever defense he tried to build. Daniel's lawyer attempted to paint him as overworked, misunderstood, a man who had succumbed to stress. But the evidence was relentless. There was no spinning hotel receipts paid for with our joint account. No excusing the jewelry purchased for women I had never met. No justification for draining Emma's college fund to cover debts from a failing business venture he'd hidden from me. With each passing hour, the man who once held all the power was reduced to silence. He couldn't charm the judge. He couldn't gaslight me anymore. His empire of lies was collapsing in real time, and I was watching from the front row. When the ruling finally came, it was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I kept the house. I secured full custody of Emma and Noah. The college funds were protected, untouchable by him. My separate account, carefully built in secret, remained mine alone. Daniel was left with his debts, his disgrace, and the bitter knowledge that he had lost everything. As the judge's gavel echoed through the room, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, cool, almost cleansing. Emma and Noah were waiting at my mother's house, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just passed. I drove there in silence, tears threatening but not from sadness. These were tears of release. When I walked through the door, Emma ran to me, her arms wrapping around my waist. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes," I whispered, holding her close. "It's over." That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone on the porch with a cup of tea. For the first time in years, the house was quiet in a way that didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. I thought about everything Daniel had taken from me, the years, the trust, the security I thought we had. But then I thought about what I had gained, my freedom, my children's safety, my strength. Because betrayal, as devastating as it is, has a way of forcing you to discover who you really are. Daniel thought he had broken me. He thought I'd stay blind, stay loyal, stay small. But he was wrong. I wasn't the naive wife he once fooled. I was the woman who stood up, fought back, and refused to let betrayal define her. He lost everything. And I gained everything that mattered, my kids, my freedom, and the unshakable knowledge that I would never again settle for less than the truth. As the stars filled the night sky, I whispered a promise to myself, would never let anyone dim my strength again. Because I wasn't just surviving. I was finally living.